Could the man who police say killed a mom and dad on a hike with their daughters in Arkansas be the same man you see in this sketch, who police say killed a woman on a hiking trail in 2023 states away? State police in Vermont say they have reached out to police in Arkansas to see if there is any connection between the suspect who was just arrested for double murder in Devil's Den State Park and a case that Vermont police have been investigating since 2023. And just wait until you hear the suspect description in that cold case out of Vermont. It may get you thinking. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. When police in Arkansas arrested Andrew James McGann for allegedly killing a mom and dad who were on a hike with their daughters in Devil's Den State Park, they said based off of where he had lived over the last couple of years, it's possible other agencies would be reaching out to see if he has any connection to unsolved cases. McGann lived in Arkansas, in Texas, and Oklahoma all since 2022. He grew up in Illinois. He's an elementary school teacher by trade, but was hired by 5 different school districts just in the last 3 years, which is very odd for someone who is a teacher. Now he's in jail in Arkansas, accused of stabbing and killing a mom and dad who were out for a hike in Devil's Den State Park with their 7 and 9-year-old daughters. Now you might remember, before McGann was arrested at a barbershop recently in Springdale, Arkansas, less than 5 minutes into his haircut, we had images like this one as police searched for a suspect. This is a picture that a witness took of a person of interest in the Arkansas murders from behind. We believe this is Andrew James McGann. That person of interest at the time was described as being a medium-built white man who was wearing a long-sleeve shirt, had fingerless gloves on, was wearing a hat, and had sunglasses on at the time he allegedly killed that mom and dad with a knife. He also had a black backpack on, which I want you to remember that part for when we talk about this case out of Vermont. We also had this sketch out of Arkansas showing the person who police say witnesses saw leaving the park with blood on their face, getting into a black sedan and speeding off. Now McGann's victims, allegedly in Arkansas, they were this couple, Kristen and Clinton Brink. They had just moved to Arkansas. Clinton was planning to start a new job the following Monday as a milk delivery driver. Police say McGann attacked the dad, Clinton first with a knife, Kristen, the mom, rushing the 7 and 9-year-old girls who were with them to safety, but then she returned to try to help her husband and she lost her life. Family members, law enforcement, the people who knew them say Clinton and Kristen Brink died heroes, and we should never forget that. It's a case that shocked people across the country. How could a quiet trail in a state park become the scene of such a brutal crime? That's the same question that police in Castleton, Vermont have been asking since October 5th, 2023. It was on the Delaware and Hudson Rail Trail, also known as the D&H Rail Trail, located in southwestern Vermont, that Honoree Fleming lost her life. Fleming was 77 years old. She was married to her husband for 47 years. They raised a son together. Fleming previously was the Dean of Education at a college now known as Vermont State University in the town of Castleton, not far from the New York line. Police say on October 3rd, 2023, around 4 p.m., Fleming entered the D&H Rail Trail. At 4:30, police say she was found dead. They say her cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. Not only did the authorities have Fleming's body, but they say they had a description of a person of interest. And this is the sketch that Vermont State Police put out almost 2 years ago. They also put out a description from witnesses who say that the person of interest was described as a white male standing 5'10", having short red hair, and he was wearing a dark gray t-shirt and carrying a black backpack. Now listen, on one hand, that is a description that could fit a lot of people, but on the other hand, it does sound similar to Andrew James McGann, and we should not dismiss that. This week, Vermont State Police said that they reached out to police in Arkansas to explore if there is any link between Honoree Fleming's death and what happened to the Brink family in Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas. They say this is a routine step for detectives, and they say there is no known connection between the cases at this time. But law enforcement is piecing together the places where Andrew McGann has lived in recent years. We found that he was hired by 5 different school districts just since 2022. He was going to be teaching elementary school children this year in Springdale, Arkansas, in the public school system, had he not been arrested for murder. Last year, he taught outside Tulsa, Oklahoma for 1 year. He started the school year outside Dallas in Plano, but he left that job after only 4 days, and it's unclear why. He has been accused by parents of acting inappropriately to students when he was a teacher in 2022 at an elementary school in Flower Mound, Texas, also outside Dallas. This mom went public, saying that he was inappropriate to young girls in his class. Another family from that school told the New York Post that McGann put a little girl on his lap and allegedly said things like, quote, "I wish I could date you. I wish you could be my girlfriend." As a parent, you read that and it just gives you the ick. I mean, yikes. Now, this mom went on Facebook saying that McGann would allegedly bring candy and soda to class, but would only give it to girls. She also claims that McGann would hold lunch for, quote, special girls. That mom also said that he would be praised for being liked by students for having charisma, which could point to how he was able to move from school to school, continuously being hired over several years, though he was leaving job after job. The Texas school district, where parents are accusing McGann of that inappropriate behavior, say their investigation into him didn't find evidence of inappropriate behavior, but they say he was suspended for concerns related to classroom management, professional judgment, and student favoritism.
And you are Andrew James McGann.
McGann made his first court appearance in Arkansas. He has yet to enter a plea. Prosecutors have hinted that they will go for the death penalty in their case against him.
This case certainly has the aggravators that exist where a jury should get to decide what the punishment for this defendant is my intention to pose that to a jury.
Police in Arkansas say they have DNA from McGann that ties him to the murders of the Brinks. It's unclear if there's any DNA that could help in the Vermont investigation in whether tying McGann to that case or ruling him out as a potential killer. Arkansas police have also hinted that McGann has confessed to them that he is responsible for what happened in Devil's Den State Park, but they didn't go further into what he actually said. As far as the search for the killer of Honoree Fleming in Vermont, there is a $25,000 reward for information leading to bringing someone to justice. Vermont State Police have also launched a place to send tips. Here's that information on your screen. Joining us now to talk more about this, a cold case expert, Joe Kennedy, a retired special agent with the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Thank you for taking the time to be with us on Law and Crime. When you look at these two cases, what we've been talking about in Arkansas and then this unsolved case from 2023 in Vermont, what are some of the similarities that stick out to you?
Well, Chris, I think we first have to start with the geography. Both of these scenes would be, somewhat isolated in nature. These are not urban areas. They're more rural, so you're not going to have as many people out traveling about. You're also going to have, fewer surveillance cameras, fewer surveillance cell towers. So I would say the thing that jumps out at me initially is just that both of these locations are somewhat in a rural environment, or at least are a remote location.
Yeah, very quiet places too, where people go for hikes and for walks like the victims were in both of these cases. One difference that I noticed in both of them, it's maybe not noticed, but it's very clear, is in the case out of Arkansas, you have 2 victims who police say were stabbed to death. And then in the case of Honoree Fleming in Castleton, Vermont, her cause of death was a gunshot to the head. When looking at possible links between these two cases, does the manner of death, how much does that matter in figuring out whether there is a connection?
Yeah, one of the things we're always looking for, Chris, is what we refer to as the instrument or the agent of death, right? And typically when folks kill someone, we shoot them, we stab them, we use a ligature to strangle them, or blunt force trauma. That's the typical 4 instruments or agents of death. So we certainly have different weapons used at each scene. So that would be something that would be an inconsistency that they might be linked.
And when you look at these cases, and the description in both cases it's very similar. He's a medium-sized white male. In the mugshot that Andrew McGann has, he has blonde hair, but you can see that it could be seen as short and red hair, like in the Vermont case, but also a 5'10" white guy with short red hair could describe a lot of people. How much does those descriptions, the similarities, do you read into that?
Well, we have to be careful with witness testimony, right? Especially if that witness has been traumatized from the event, right? Or, upset. And if you think about the incident down in Arkansas where the children are left behind, right? Those are interviews that would likely have been done at some type of child advocacy center using child forensic interviewing techniques. And you have to be careful, as you're getting interviews with children too, as to what's related and is that accurately interpreted from the interviewer. Witnesses, sometimes they can be extremely reliable, Chris, and sometimes, because of the event and their vantage point, are they seeing it? Is their view obstructed in any way to where they might not have been or just saw someone for a short period of time? So these are all the things that we would be questioning and trying to come up with is, how long did they see the individual, and then how accurate is that description actually?
Vermont is a state that does not see a lot of crime, especially like this case of a woman who just goes out for a hike. She had entered the trail in Castleton, Vermont at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and she was found dead with a gunshot wound to her head at 4:30. And you have a witness in multiple witnesses who are able to describe this person, but they haven't been arrested since 2023. What are the things that stand out to you in her case as it's still unsolved at this point?
Well, the first thing that we start with a cold case, Chris, is victimology, right? And that includes her travel patterns for that day. Where was she supposed to have been? Did she arrive at certain locations on time? Was there any delays? In addition to the victimology, what we're looking for, a lot of times people will start looking at the past of a victim and, go backwards. What we like to look at from a cold case perspective is what we refer to as futuristic events. Had she not been killed at somewhere between 4 and 4:30, where would she be, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours, into the future? So sometimes those futuristic events or appointments or where she was necessarily supposed to be could shield some clues to us as to who could possibly be responsible for her murder.
Going back to the manner of death, and just a terrifying part of what happened in Arkansas was police say, and it's terrifying no matter how it happens, but there was no link, police say, between Andrew McGann and the Brink family, who they were just going out for a hike in Devil's Den State Park. But when you look at Honoree Fleming's case, and it was a single gunshot wound to the head, does that, as someone who looks at these types of cases, do you feel like this could have been a targeted attack on her when you think of just how she died?
Well, without seeing the scene, that's a tough question to ask. I will say this, someone would have to know her routine, right? Someone had to know she was going to that park that day, unless it was some random encounter. And, when we talk about random encounters, that's a small percentage of crime, stranger on stranger crimes, they happen, but they're not that frequent. About 9 out of 10 murders, Chris, there's some type of prior relationship. So, when we see a person who's, supposed to be at a certain location and then they're killed, the agent of death or the instrument of death, that could vary. Just because the gun's used, that doesn't really give us a lot of insights into the perpetrator. We would want to know, a lot more about her and her, not only her routine, but, where she was supposed to be that day.
And as someone who works cold cases, and you think of Honoree Fleming's family, and they've been waiting for nearly 2 years for answers. There are very well-known cases that have gone on for far longer and have never been solved. Why is it, from what you've seen in your career, that so many cases go unsolved? What is it about a case that can just lead it to go cold?
Well, Chris, there's only 3 ways to solve a murder, right? We have to have some physical evidence, fingerprints, DNA, hair, fibers, footprints, shoe prints, etc. Witnesses solve cases, or we need to get a confession. Now, interestingly, only about 15% of homicides are solved with physical evidence. About 35% are solved with witness testimony. The problem is the witnesses change their story. They don't show up to testify. They get impeached at trial. So about half of murders, actually, it comes down to the confession, Chris. We have got to get that person to confess to us before we solve the case. And unlike what we see on a lot of TV shows, recovering DNA, recovering fingerprints from crime scenes, that's very difficult in many cases. And again, only about 15% of cases are solved with physical evidence. So it runs between those three things. And what you'll find is bystander behavior has significantly changed today than what it used to be. Folks, don't want to call the police anymore. They don't want to cooperate with the police a lot of times, even in these heinous murders like we're talking about today. Sometimes it's like pulling teeth just to get folks to cooperate. I mean, that's the reality of the situation.
And knowing that witnesses may not want to call police, that the testimony may change, people's brains get foggy, they move on with life. How do you, as an investigator, if you were an investigator today with the Vermont State Police and you have this horrific murder of a woman, Honoree Fleming, how do you go about it from today moving forward, knowing that, nearly 2 years has passed since she died?
Well, from a cold case perspective, Chris, what we do is we start all over. And that is from square one, day one. And as we reconstruct that case, we try to identify maybe some clues that were overlooked, right? And I'll tell you this is an interesting fact that we follow a lot, is so few murders are actually planned. And I want you to think about it. Burglaries are planned, break-ins are planned, robberies are planned, sexual assaults are planned, but murders aren't planned for the most part. And so what happens is the perpetrator, they do not expect to get the response from the victim that they receive. In other words, the victim fights back, right? And the victim's response always is what results in their demise. And so we have to look at and bring that into the equation as we're looking at these old cold cases, is what caused this person to get murdered. And some of the questions we ask is, why was this person a murder victim? Why is their body here on this particular day? And there's a whole lot of, you think about, not only we're looking for physical evidence, but we have to look at crime scenes and read them. Every crime scene will speak to us, right? Because in addition to leaving physical evidence at a crime scene, offenders deposit their personality at crime scenes. And so let's just for an example, let's take the case in Arkansas. Right? There's a lot of anger in that crime scene. This is the sharp instrument, and there's in multiple stab wounds. The offender did it in front of witnesses, right? They clearly identify, come up with a composite sketch of him. And I think it's the same way with the case in Vermont, right? Is there anger involved in this scene because a witness is able to come up with a composite, right? Or a potential identification. You also see an escalation of assaultive behavior, right? In cases of anger. And there's almost an effort to, humiliate the victim. And then there's a lot of slashing and tearing of the victim. So the Arkansas case, 100% anger. I don't know enough, or I've not seen enough about the Vermont case to say, hey, we've got anger at this scene. But certainly doing, murders in front of witnesses would fall into that category.
Because the Vermont State Police this week, and kind of how this story came about, was they had said they reached out to police in Arkansas once they saw that Andrew James McGann was arrested, because he does fit the description. And they say that they reach out to a lot of different police departments when they're arrested as they're trying to solve this case. What are the type of questions that an investigator, say from Vermont, would ask an investigator in Arkansas? Beyond, clearly both of these incidents happened on hiking trails, in quiet places. The suspect description is very similar. But what are some of the other questions that Vermont State Police would have for an investigator in Arkansas?
Well, those questions are going to revolve around the similarities of the crimes. Are we seeing similar crime patterns here? Or is it the same modus operandi? Is the signature component, similar? And a lot of this information, this is stuff that won't be released to the public. But those are some of the questions that those respective state police agencies would be doing. And in addition to that, can they geographically put that individual in both states? Either before, during, or after the murder. That would be, crucial. So you're talking about, debit card transactions, electronic communications, phone, cell towers, all the way up to toll roads, license plate readers. So can we put him in both states? And, it's probably more than anything, Chris, this is just to cover their bases, to make sure they're dotting all their I's, crossing all their T's. And if there's anything really significant, from what I've read, they would have flown some investigators down there. I will tell you, both of those agencies have great reputations for solving, a violent crime, both the Vermont State Police and the Arkansas State Police. Ironically, I'll be down in Arkansas teaching a cold case class September, 3 and 4 in Little Rock.
Oh, well, I mean, this has been, so top of mind. I mean, even with that, because often you work on cases that reach that point where they need just that extra, the fresh set of eyes that look on it. The fact that they were able to catch Andrew James McGann, they say that they have him. They say they have DNA on him. They have, he allegedly confessed. They haven't said specifically what he told them during the interview, but it seems like they have a very strong case against this guy. Knowing how cases can go cold, and I feel like so often in the public, we take for granted how quickly some of these investigations can be. I guess, how impressive is it that Arkansas State Police were able to close this case as quickly as they were?
Well, Chris, I'm not surprised. I have worked with several folks from the Arkansas State Police. We've actually looked at some of their cold cases over the years, and they have a great reputation. They're diligent, they're tenacious, they're persistent. So I'm not surprised at all that they solved this case rather quickly. And that's what typically we're expected to do. Unfortunately, in the cold case world, if that case doesn't get solved in the first 48, 72 hours, there's a good chance it's going to go down the trail of becoming a cold case. But, that's okay, because that's when we're able to use that liability of time that worked against us in a hot case. We turn it around through those relationship changes. Boyfriend and girlfriend of yesteryear are no longer together, and maybe they're aware of the other one's participation in a murder or something. So we turn that liability of time into an asset.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because relationships change. I'm sure, whatever happened to Honoree Fleming, whoever did it, there is someone who knows that they did it, or someone who knows someone who did do it. They just need to come forward. Often, what is it, would you say, those conversations, those relationships that lead to cracks in cold cases?
Well, Chris, it's real simple. What happens is the perpetrator, they plan to do that other crime, but they never bargain for conducting a murder or carrying out a murder. And so it weighs on them. And you'll see almost instantaneously they'll start coping. And one of the coping mechanisms is to tell someone. And often the receiver of that information, they don't even believe the person telling them, oh, yeah, I was involved in this murder, because they think they're maybe just being braggadocious or, trying to be a tough guy or what have you. But I will tell you this, in the vast majority of cold cases, it's something that we start looking at immediately. Once we assume it as a cold case, is we start looking at the pool of suspects and we start evaluating their life, because we have noticed that their lives start to deteriorate. They can't sleep. They get insomnia. They resort to drug and alcohol usage. They can't maintain a job. They can't live in the same location for any amount of time. So that's one of the things we put a lot of emphasis on with cold cases, is the deterioration of the suspect's life, because they just, it's having that kind of negative impact on them. You will have an occasional suspect whose life improves after a cold case. And what I mean by that is maybe they, weren't such a model citizen, and then they commit a murder, and it's like the murder almost shocks them into becoming a better person. So they go and gain employment, they get married, they become a productive citizen. But those are the two things that we focus on the most with cold cases. And a lot of people wouldn't realize that we're looking for that deterioration or sometimes improvement in their life.
No, that's fascinating perspective. Joe Kennedy, thank you as always for taking the time to be with us on Law&Crime. Hopefully bringing attention once again to the case of Honoree Fleming will bring someone to justice. We appreciate you joining us.
God bless you, Chris. Thank you.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.